The chandeliers of the Waldorf Grand glittered like frozen constellations, casting gold light across the marble floors. Music from a string quartet drifted through the cavernous ballroom, competing with the clink of crystal flutes and the hushed conspiracies of Manhattan's elite. Clara Hayes stood at the edge of the crowd, balancing a tray of champagne glasses, her black dress and heels carefully chosen to look more expensive than they were. She wasn't supposed to be here as a guest, just another junior marketing associate from the agency that had secured tonight's account. But a last-minute staffing shuffle had placed her in the gala itself, tasked with keeping the champagne tower flowing and the clients happy. It should have been simple: smile, pour, stay invisible. Instead, her gaze kept drifting toward the center of the room, where Damian Cross commanded attention like gravity itself. Broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, and dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than her entire yearly rent, the CEO of Cross International looked as though he had been sculpted from the very steel and glass of the city skyline. People circled him: politicians, investors, socialites, hungry for a word, a glance, a scrap of his approval. Clara told herself she didn't care. He was just another name splashed across financial magazines, another reminder of a world built on connections she didn't have. She was here to work, not gawk, yet her stomach tightened every time his piercing gaze swept the room. She was refilling a flute when the temperature in the ballroom seemed to shift. A woman with a laugh as sharp as glass leaned into Damian's space. Evelyn Blackwood. Even Clara knew her name. Heiress, investor, and as ruthless as the rumors claimed. Evelyn tilted her head, lips painted in a dangerous crimson, and said something that made Damian's jaw clench. His hand flexed around his glass, an imperceptible tell to most. But Clara, watching from too close, caught it. And then it happened. Damian's eyes flicked upward, searching, landing on her like a spotlight. The sheer intensity of it pinned Clara in place. Before she could move, before she could remember she was just the help tonight, his voice cut through the hum of conversation. "There she is," he announced smoothly, a faint smile curving his mouth. "My date has finally arrived." The tray in Clara's hands trembled, a few drops of champagne spilled, fizzing against the polished silver. Heads turned. Evelyn's eyebrows arched, disbelief curling into a smirk. Clara opened her mouth, ready to deny, to explain, but Damian was already striding toward her. "Darling," he said, sliding the glass effortlessly from her hand and setting it aside. His hand pressed lightly to the small of her back, firm enough to claim, gentle enough to silence protest. "I was beginning to think you'd abandoned me." Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. Heat rushed to her cheeks as she realized the room, the entire glittering, money-drenched room, was staring at her. Cameras rose discreetly, lenses glinting like watchful eyes. She thought of her student loans, of her boss who had warned her not to embarrass the firm, of the fact that a single wrong move could ruin everything. So she forced a smile, brittle but convincing, and whispered through clenched teeth, "What on earth are you doing?" "Saving myself," Damian murmured, low enough only she could hear. His breath brushed her ear, sending a shiver down her spine despite herself. "Play along, just for tonight." The ballroom swallowed the moment whole. Clara slipped her arm through his, her body moving on instinct, though her mind screamed against the insanity. Evelyn's sharp laugh cut across the marble. "How charming, Damian. I didn't realize you had a taste for surprises." Clara tightened her grip on his arm, her nails nearly digging into the fabric of his jacket. If she walked away, she'd expose them both. If she stayed, she risked drowning in a lie spun out of diamonds and deceit. She tilted her chin, forcing a confidence she didn't feel. "I never let him get too comfortable," she said lightly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. A ripple of laughter, low and surprised, swept through the nearby onlookers. Damian's hand pressed firmer against her back, silent approval cloaked in that faint, unreadable smile. But inside, Clara's world tilted. The lie had been spoken into existence, wrapped in crystal light and champagne fizz. And as the cameras flashed, immortalizing her beside Manhattan's most powerful bachelor, she realized she had just stepped into a story she had no idea how to survive. Clara could still feel the burn of camera flashes on her skin long after she and Damian stepped into the corridor beyond the ballroom. The air outside was cooler, quieter, but her chest was tight as if she had just run a mile through Manhattan traffic. She yanked her arm free from his grip, her voice trembling with anger and confusion. "You dragged me into this in front of half the city. What was that supposed to be?" Damian stopped walking and turned slowly, his sharp features unreadable in the dim light of the corridor. His calmness was almost more infuriating than his earlier stunt. "If I had not named you Evelyn, would have eaten me alive in there," he said evenly. "She was waiting to humiliate me, and you were the only way out." The words should have been reassuring, but instead they felt like shackles tightening around Clara's wrists. "I am not some prop you can parade whenever it is convenient," she hissed, trying to keep her voice low, though the echo of it still bounced against the marble walls. "You think I wanted this?" Damian leaned closer, his tone dropping until it was just for her ears. "I did not plan it, but when I looked across that room and saw you, it was the only move that made sense. You saved me, Clara Hayes." Her heart stumbled against her ribs. Saved him? From what exactly? From Evelyn's venom or from his own lies? She wanted to ask, but before she could, a sound reached them, the unmistakable click of high heels. Evelyn herself rounded the corner, a glass of wine still balanced effortlessly in her hand, her eyes glittering like a predator that had cornered prey. "Well, well," she purred, "what an intimate little escape. I was beginning to think your mystery date was a figment of your imagination, Damian, but here she is, in the flesh." Clara swallowed hard, every instinct screaming at her to flee, but Damian shifted subtly, placing himself between her and Evelyn. His hand brushed Clara's again, deliberate, not for her, but for Evelyn's watchful eyes. "We value our privacy," Damian said smoothly. "Not everyone enjoys putting their entire life on display." Evelyn's laugh was soft and sharp. "Privacy is rare in our world, darling," she said, circling them with lazy precision, "but secrets, they never stay buried for long." Clara felt the warning in every syllable. Evelyn was not convinced. And worse, she was going to dig. When Evelyn finally drifted back toward the ballroom, leaving a faint trail of perfume and menace behind, Clara exhaled shakily. "You see," Damian murmured, "this is why I need you just for 1 week, until the deal with her father closes. Then you can walk away and no one will ever know." 1 week, Clara repeated, the weight of it heavy in her chest. He nodded, his blue eyes steady on hers. "I will make it worth your while, not with money if that offends you, but with opportunity. Connections you could never reach on your own." She hated how tempting that sounded, hated how his words slipped under her skin like silk and shackles all at once. Before she could answer, a pair of voices echoed down the hall, 2 reporters whispering to each other, her name already on their lips. Clara Hayes, his lover, the exclusive story. Her stomach dropped. The lie had already spread beyond the ballroom. It had grown legs and was running wild through the city. Damian's hand tightened around hers, his gaze fierce. "You are already in this, Clara. Now the only question is, do you want to sink or do you want to learn how to swim beside me?" Her answer stuck in her throat as the doors to the ballroom opened again, spilling light laughter and the weight of 100 curious eyes. Clara realized that the moment she stepped back inside, there would be no undoing what had just begun. The night after the gala felt like a fever dream to Clara. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damian's hand on her back, the flash of cameras, the look of triumph in Evelyn's eyes when she promised secrets would never stay hidden. She told herself she would go back to her small apartment, forget it ever happened, and let the storm pass. But when she opened her email the next morning, the storm was already waiting for her. Headlines blared across her screen. Damian Cross's secret lover revealed, Clara Hayes seen leaving gala together, speculation about mystery romance. Her phone buzzed relentlessly. Sarah, her roommate, shouting over the line that reporters were camped outside their building asking for comment. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the kitchen window, her heart pounding like she was trapped in a cage. There was a knock on the door downstairs, heavy, deliberate. For one terrifying moment she thought the press had tracked her down, but when she opened the door, Damian Cross himself was standing there in a dark suit, looking as if he had stepped straight from the cover of a magazine into her shabby hallway. "We need to talk," he said quietly, before she could slam the door in his face. Clara folded her arms over her chest. You made me a headline, Damian, and now I am the one who has to deal with this mess. His eyes flicked past her to the peeling wallpaper, the second-hand couch, the tiny kitchen table, and something in his expression shifted, softening in a way that unsettled her more than his usual arrogance. I told you last night this was bigger than a single moment. Now that the story is out, we need to make it believable, or it will destroy both of us. Destroy was not a word Clara took lightly. She wanted to tell him to leave, but when Damian stepped closer, lowering his voice, his next words rooted her to the spot. Evelyn is already moving against me. She has offered to leak documents to the press claiming I manipulated markets. If the board believes her, the merger collapses. If the merger collapses, hundreds of jobs disappear. Clara swallowed hard. What does that have to do with me? Because he said evenly, you are the only thing keeping her from sinking her teeth deeper. As long as she believes we are solid, she cannot call me a liar without risking her own credibility. Clara shook her head, the weight of it pressing down on her ribs. I am not built for this. I do not belong in your world. Damian's gaze did not waver. Then borrow mine, he said. Borrow my name, my influence, my protection until the danger passes. All I ask is 1 week. 1 week as my lover in the eyes of the city. The words scorched her ears. Lover. He had said it so easily, like it was a title she could wear without consequences. But then she remembered Sarah's panicked voice on the phone, reporters at her doorstep, headlines with her name plastered across them. There was no going back to anonymity. The lie was already alive and growing. Damian extended his hand, palm open, his eyes fixed on hers, with a mixture of command and something more vulnerable, something he was trying to hide. Choose, Clara. Walk away and let the city devour you, or take my hand and fight beside me. Her breath trembled as she stared at him, knowing that if she touched him again, nothing would ever be the same. The stairwell light flickered shadows chasing across his sharp features. Clara realized the truth in that instant. The moment she placed her hand in his, she would no longer be pretending to be anyone's lover. She would be stepping into a role that could consume her heart, her future, and maybe her soul. And yet, she lifted her hand and let it fall into his. Damian's grip closed around hers, strong, unyielding, sealing a pact with more danger than either of them dared admit. Outside, cameras clicked as if the city already knew the decision she had made. Clara never imagined Bergdorf Goodman would feel like a battlefield, but standing beneath the glittering lights of the designer floor, she felt like every silk dress and glass case was a weapon aimed at her nerves. Damian walked beside her with the calm assurance of a man who had spent his life in places like this, his dark suit impeccable, his presence commanding. To everyone else in the store, he looked like a king bringing his queen to be dressed for the throne. To Clara, it felt like she was being dressed for her own trial. The sales associate floated toward them like a swan gliding across water. Mr. Cross, always a pleasure, she said, her eyes flicking to Clara with sharp curiosity. And this must be the woman the whole city is whispering about. Clara forced a smile, though her pulse hammered in her ears. Damian's hand brushed hers casually, deliberate enough to remind her of the part she was playing. We will need a complete wardrobe, Damian said effortlessly. Something appropriate for dinners, galas, weekends at the estate. Clara's mouth went dry at his words. He was not just planning for a night or even a week. He was preparing her for immersion into his entire world. As the associate swept Clara into the fitting rooms, the true pressure began. Gowns and midnight silk dresses that shimmered like liquid gold, shoes worth more than her entire savings account appeared before her. Each time she emerged from the dressing room, Damian looked up, his eyes cool, lie assessing, but sometimes his expression shifted, betraying flickers of something warmer, something that made her skin flush hotter than the harsh lights. When she stepped out in a deep sapphire dress, his gaze lingered too long and the air between them thickened until the associate's polite cough broke it. Clara tried to keep her voice steady as she whispered to him while adjusting the fabric. This is insane. I cannot afford any of this. You do not need to, he murmured without looking away. Consider it investment, but investment in what she asked. In us, he replied, and though the word was meant for show, it sliced through her defenses with terrifying precision. Hours later, Clara sat surrounded by garment bags, shoes in delicate boxes, jewelry tucked into velvet cases. She felt like she had been remade into someone else's reflection. Damian leaned closer as they prepared to leave, his voice pitched low. Tonight there is a dinner. Evelyn will be there, and she will be watching for cracks. If she senses weakness, she will expose you. Clara's stomach turned cold. What do you mean, expose me? Damian's jaw tightened. She has already hired someone to dig into your past. If she discovers your debts, your parents, your job history, she will use it to tear you apart and by extension destroy me. Clara's legs wobbled as they walked back toward the waiting car, the city beyond buzzing with late afternoon chaos. She thought of her father's mechanic shop, her mother's diner, her student loans, all of it so far from the glittering cage she had been thrust into. One article, one whispered rumor, and Evelyn could turn her life into a spectacle. When the Tesla's door shut around them, Damian reached for her hand, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I will not let her touch you, he said quietly, almost fiercely. Clara met his eyes, seeing not just a ruthless CEO, but a man haunted by enemies who circled like wolves. She should have pulled away, reminded him this was all pretend. Instead, her fingers tightened around his as the city lights streaked past the glass. She had stepped into his world, and already the ground beneath her was shifting. She could not tell if Damian Cross was her shield, or the very storm that would break her. And somewhere deep down, she realized that the line between pretending and feeling had already begun to blur. The Hamptons estate loomed out of the fog like something torn from a dream, marble pillars glistening with sea spray, windows glowing against the storm clouds rolling in from the Atlantic. Clara stepped out of the car, and the salt air hit her lungs sharp and bracing. Damian had barely spoken on the drive, his jaw tight, his phone buzzing with calls he ignored. Now, as the wind whipped her hair into her face, he finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. This weekend, he said, will decide everything. If we can convince them here, we can survive what Evelyn is planning. Clara wanted to ask who them was, but she already knew. Evelyn and her father, and every set of eyes waiting to see if Damian's mysterious lover was real or just a mask. She followed him up the stone steps into the mansion, the air inside warmer, scented faintly of cedar and old books. It was beautiful, but it felt like a stage, and she was the actress who had never learned her lines. By dusk, the storm broke, thunder rattling the glass walls, rain slashing across the deck. Power flickered twice, then died, plunging the estate into shadow. Clara jumped as lightning lit the room, revealing Damian pouring 2 glasses of wine by candlelight. This house has a generator, he muttered, but it will take time. He handed her a glass, his hand steady, but his eyes distant. Clara studied him, the storm outside mirror, awed by the storm in his gaze. For the first time, she wondered if this was more than just a business maneuver. For the first time, she saw the edges of a man who carried more than arrogance. They sat by the fire, Damian striking a match to light it, his face cast in flickering gold. He leaned back, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. Do you want to know why I chose you that night at the gala? Clara's breath caught. I assumed it was because I was the closest target, she said, but Damian shook his head. No, I chose you because I knew who you were. Clara froze, her mind scrambling. You knew me. How? His gaze did not waver. Years ago, your father tried to expose corruption at one of my competitors. No one listened except me. He saved my company before I even inherited it. And when I saw you standing there, I recognized your name. I knew the press would buy it because I knew your family had integrity. Her throat tightened, a mix of pride and terror twisting inside her. You were watching me before this, Damian. He nodded once, not denying it. I told myself it was strategy, but the truth is, I was curious about you long before that night. Clara set down her glass, her pulse hammering against her skin. Before she could respond, a crash echoed from upstairs, a door slamming in the wind, or maybe something else. Damian was on his feet in an instant, moving silently through the hallways. Clara followed, candle in hand, her heart pounding with each creak of the old estate. They reached a locked study at the end of the corridor. Damian fumbled with the key, then froze. The door was ajar. Clara pushed it open, and the candlelight spilled across walls covered with clippings, photographs, articles, all centered on one name. Her name, Clara Hayes. Her childhood achievements, her college scholarships, even the diner where her mother worked. She staggered back, the weight of it hitting her like the thunder awed. Outside, Damian, she whispered, what is this? He stood behind her, the storm's light flashing across his face. Evidence, he said flatly. Proof that Evelyn has been investigating you for months. But the unease in Clara's chest refused to fade, because some of those clippings looked too carefully chosen, too personal, as if Damian himself had been collecting them long before Evelyn had sharpened her knives. The storm roared louder outside, but it was nothing compared to the silence that fell between them inside that room. The storm had passed, but Clara felt like the air inside her chest had only grown heavier. By the time Damian's driver returned them to Manhattan, the city was already humming with new rumors. The dinner Evelyn promised had materialized faster than Clara expected, and now she stood at the top of a marble staircase, staring down at a dining hall lit like a stage. Every seat was filled with faces she had only ever seen in glossy magazines, financiers, politicians, society, families, watching her with hunger disguised as courtesy. Damian's hand brushed her back as they descended together, and the small contact steadied her pulse, though it also set her nerves alight. He leaned close, his voice a whisper, only for her. Tonight, she will try to break you. Whatever she asks, answer like you belong here. Clara's throat was dry, but she nodded because there was no choice anymore. Cameras hovered at the edges like vultures waiting for her to stumble. At the long, polished table, Evelyn sat draped in scarlet, her smile as sharp as broken glass. Well, if it isn't the mystery woman herself, she purred, her words carrying easily across the clatter of crystal. Do tell us, Clara, how did Damian finally win your heart? I imagine it was not easy. A low ripple of amusement ran around the table. Clara forced herself to meet Evelyn's gaze. He didn't win my heart, she said softly but firmly. He earned it. For a moment, silence clung to the room, and she felt the tide tilt just slightly in her favor. But Evelyn was far from finished. She leaned forward, her earrings catching the light. And when he proposed, where were you? Paris, Venice, perhaps the rooftop of his penthouse? Her voice dripped with poison disguised as sugar. Clara felt Damian's hand tighten under the table, warning or encouragement she could not tell. She lifted her chin and let the words fall. It wasn't Paris or Venice, it was the diner my mother has worked at for 20 years. A place filled with grease and laughter and chipped coffee cups. He proposed to me there because he knew it mattered to me. The room shifted, murmurs rising, some skeptical, some startled. Damian turned to her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes burned with something dangerous, almost like admiration. Evelyn laughed, but it was thinner this time, brittle. How quaint, she said, though her knuckles whitened around her wineglass. The rest of the evening unfolded like a chess match. Every time Evelyn tried to corner her, Clara parried with a story, half real, half improvised, grounding herself in details that sounded too human to be fake. She spoke of childhood memories, laced with warmth she did not entirely invent, and each word seemed to draw Damian's attention deeper, as though he was hearing her truth for the first time. Then it happened. When the final course arrived, Evelyn raised her glass, her eyes glinting, to Damian Cross and his bride-to-be. May their happiness last longer than the stories in tomorrow's papers. A wave of polite laughter followed, but before Clara could react, Damian rose his chair, scraping against the marble. He did not toast politely, he did not smile. Instead, he slid his hand into Clara's and faced the table, his voice cutting clean through the room. This is not a story. This is my future. She is my future. Gasps broke out as cameras clicked faster than thunder. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. He had not just defended her, he had declared her as something more than a shield. She looked up at him, stunned, her mouth dry as ash. Was it strategy to silence Evelyn, or had the mask finally slipped, revealing what he truly wanted? The answer glimmered in his eyes, and terrified her more than Evelyn's smile ever could. Clara could still feel the tremor in her hand long after Damian's public declaration. The moment he said those words in front of Manhattan's elite, she felt the air around her shift, as if the entire room had drawn its collective breath and refused to release it. Cameras had captured everything, and by morning, the headlines would not just call her his lover, they would call her his chosen future. Her phone buzzed under the table again and again, a torrent of messages from Sarah, her parents, even unknown numbers, all asking the same thing. Was it real? After dinner, Damian escorted her out into the courtyard lit by lanterns swaying in the wind. His jaw was tight, his eyes unreadable. "You should have told me you were going to say that," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Do you know what that means for me, Damian? For my family?" He stopped abruptly, turning to her, his gaze fierce. "If I had not said it, Evelyn would have destroyed you tonight." She was one question away from exposing everything. This was the only move left. Clara shook her head, her heart twisting. "You made me part of your chess game without asking. I am not a piece you can move around the board, Damian." His voice lowered, but the intensity only sharpened. "You think I do not know that, Clara? You think I do not see how every word you spoke tonight saved me more than I saved you? The guests applauded you because you were real, and nothing in that room was real, except you." Her chest ached at the way he said it, but before she could respond, footsteps echoed from the shadows. Evelyn emerged, her red gown glowing like a flame, her smile venomous. "Congratulations," she said sweetly. "I almost believed your little story." Almost. She circled them slowly, her gaze flicking between their clasped hands and Clara's pale face. "Enjoy the glow while it lasts, because secrets always rot when dragged into the light." Clara stiffened. Evelyn knew something more than she was letting on. Damian stepped forward, shielding Clara with his body. "Careful, Evelyn," he warned, "because if you come after her, you come after me." Evelyn only laughed low and sharp. "That is exactly what I was counting on." The following morning, the tabloids exploded with headlines, photographs of Damian's declaration frozen in time. Clara Hayes, the woman who stole the city's most unattainable heart. Yet tucked between the glossy spreads was another story, smaller, darker. An anonymous leak claiming Clara's employment history was fabricated, her debts hidden, her background suspicious. Clara's blood ran cold as she read the article, her name dragged through the mud, her integrity questioned in black ink. Sarah called her crying, saying reporters were outside their building demanding answers. Clara's father left a voicemail, his voice heavy with disappointment, asking why she had lied about who she was. When Clara confronted Damian in his penthouse, she found him already pacing, phone in hand. His expression was grim. "Evelyn planted it," he said without hesitation. "She is trying to turn the board against me by discrediting you." Clara's voice cracked. "And what if she succeeds, Damian? My family believes it already. The press believes it. What happens when you realize you tied yourself to the wrong woman?" He stopped dead in front of her, his eyes burning like storm fire. "Then I fight for you harder than I have fought for anything in my life, because I am not letting her take you from me." The words struck her like lightning, raw and unguarded, but they only deepened the storm inside her chest. Was Damian's vow born of strategy, or something far more dangerous, something she was already beginning to want? And as another wave of messages poured into her phone, filled with threats, questions, and demands, Clara realized the lie had grown too large to contain. What started in a ballroom had become a fire threatening to consume them both, and the only way out was through the flames. Clara sat at the edge of Damian's penthouse window, staring out at the skyline as though the city itself were pressing in on her. The headlines had multiplied overnight until her face was everywhere on television screens, on gossip blogs, even on the scrolling ticker outside Times Square. Anonymous sources claimed she was a gold digger, a fraud, someone who had schemed her way into Damian Cross's life. She wanted to scream that none of it was true, but the louder the lie grew, the smaller her voice seemed to become. Damian entered the room, his tie discarded, his sleeves rolled back, his usually perfect composure cracked. He dropped a folder on the table, its contents spilling out. Photographs, credit reports, even a forged eviction notice. "Evelyn is behind every one of these," he said grimly. "She has people digging into your life, planting false records." Clara's stomach knotted as she picked up one of the photos. It was of her walking home from work weeks before the gala, a stranger's lens capturing her most ordinary moment. She shivered. Someone had been watching her long before this began. "What are we supposed to do?" she whispered, the weight of it threatening to crush her. Damian's jaw tightened. "We get ahead of it. Tonight there is a press event for the merger. I need you there by my side. If you hide, they will think you are guilty. If you stand with me, they will have to doubt their own narrative." "Clara," his voice shook. "You are asking me to walk straight into the fire, Damian." He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw fear flicker in his. "I am asking you to trust me." That night, the ballroom was brighter than any before, chandeliers scattering light across marble floors, reporters packed shoulder to shoulder, cameras aimed like rifles. When Damian entered with Clara at his side, the room erupted in flashes and shouted questions. Clara felt every eye cut into her skin like glass, but Damian's hand pressed against the small of her back, steady, guiding her forward. He raised a glass to speak, his voice sharp enough to silence the noise. "There are those who would have you believe lies about the woman beside me," Damian said, his gaze sweeping the room. "But I tell you this, she is the only person in this city who has stood beside me without agenda, without fear. You want the truth? It is simple. I would burn every deal, every dollar before I would let her be destroyed." Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Clara's heart stuttered at the rawness in his tone. This was not just strategy, not just survival. It sounded frighteningly close to devotion, but before the room could settle, a voice cut through the silence. "What about this evidence?" A reporter held up a dossier, pages flashing in the camera light. Clara's name was bold across the top, tied to accounts she had never seen, debts she had never taken. The crowd erupted in shouts, the lie crashing down heavier than before. Clara's chest constricted, her vision blurring, but Damian's hand gripped hers, pulling her close, his whisper fierce. "Do not break now. This is exactly what she wants." Clara forced herself to meet the cameras, her voice shaking but clear. "Those papers are forged. My only crime is trying to survive in a city that devours people like me. If that makes me unworthy of standing here, then so be it. But I will not apologize for who I am." The room fell into stunned silence, even the reporters hesitating. As the event unraveled into chaos, Damian pulled her into a side corridor, his pulse hammering beneath his skin. "You just turned the tide," he said, his voice rough with awe. "They believe you because you gave them something money cannot buy, the truth of your fearlessness." But Clara barely heard him, because in that moment she realized something terrifying. The lie that had begun in a ballroom was no longer a lie at all. Somewhere between the shadows and the spotlight, she had stopped pretending, and the way Damian was looking at her told her he had too. Clara woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand, the screen flashing with messages that made her stomach twist. Anonymous numbers flooded her with threats, whispers of betrayal, warnings that she would regret standing beside Damian Cross. She sat up in the dim light of the penthouse bedroom, her pulse pounding harder with every new notification. Damian was already awake, standing at the window, his silhouette sharp against the pale dawn. He turned when he felt her eyes on him, and for a moment, Clara thought she saw something fragile flicker in his expression before the mask slid back into place. "They struck harder than I expected," he said, holding up his own phone. "Evelyn's people aren't just leaking lies anymore. They're moving money, making it look like you've been paid by competitors. They want the board to think you're not only a fraud, but a spy." Clara's chest constricted. "That's insane," she whispered. "I wouldn't even know where to start with something like that." Damian crossed the room and crouched in front of her, his hand brushing hers. "I know, but the board doesn't know you like I do. That's why we have to prove it's a setup before the vote tonight." The vote. Clara remembered him mentioning it before, but now the weight of it dropped like a stone. If the board believed Evelyn, Damian wouldn't just lose the merger H. He could lose his company, his reputation, everything he had built, and all of it would be laid at Clara's feet. Hours later, she found herself in the back of Damian's car, weaving through Manhattan traffic while rain streaked across the windows. They were headed to a private meeting with one of the board members, an old ally Damian swore could still be trusted. But trust felt like a fragile thing, and Clara couldn't shake the feeling they were walking into another trap. When they arrived at the brownstone, a hush fell over the street, too quiet for the city. Inside, the air smelled of dust and paper, the board member waiting in a leather chair by the fire. His eyes lingered on Clara longer than she liked, a measuring look that made her skin crawl. "So this is the woman who's worth risking your empire for," he said dryly. Damian's jaw tightened, but Clara spoke before he could. "I never asked for this. I never asked to be anyone's weapon or shield. I just wanted to survive." Her honesty cut through the smoke-filled air, and for a moment the man actually looked unsettled. But before he could answer, a crash erupted from outside the window, shouts echoing down the alley. Damian pulled Clara to her feet instantly, the board members shouting that they had been followed. In the chaos, Clara caught a glimpse of a shadow fleeing into the rain, camera flashes exploding like lightning. Whoever it was had captured everything Damian, his supposed secret lover Clara, framed in scandalous light. By the time they made it back to the car, Clara's hands were trembling. Damian gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "It's worse than we thought," he muttered. "They don't just want the company, Clara. They want to destroy us both." Clara swallowed hard, her voice barely audible. "Then maybe we stop pretending. Maybe the only way to beat Evelyn is to make the lie real." Damian turned to her sharply, his eyes burning, with shock and something deeper raw. "Be careful what you offer, Clara," he said, his voice rough. "Because once we cross that line, there's no going back." The city lights blurred past as the storm raged around them, but inside the car the storm was far more dangerous. For the first time, Clara felt the truth looming closer than any lie. She was no longer sure if Damian Cross was her protector, her destroyer, or the man who might claim her heart forever. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and steel, the city spread out beneath it like an empire waiting to be divided. Clara had never felt so small, yet so exposed, every pair of eyes in the room cutting into her as if she were already guilty. Damian stood at the head of the table, a king facing rebellion, his posture iron, his voice steady, but the strain beneath it betrayed the stakes. Tonight's vote would decide if he remained in power, or if Evelyn's poison had seeped too deep. Evelyn arrived late, her entrance calculated, a predator stepping into the arena in scarlet silk. She laid a thick folder on the polished table, sliding it forward with deliberate care. "Proof," she said, her smile slicing through the air, "that your Clara has been siphoning money through shell accounts." Whispers spread across the room, pages turned, photographs passed from hand to hand. Clara's heart lurched, her face drained of color. She could barely breathe as the lies stacked higher than she could ever hope to climb. Damian didn't flinch. He lifted the folder, slowly scanning its contents, then looked directly at Evelyn. "Clever fabrication," he said coldly, but sloppy. He turned to the board, his voice a blade cutting clean. "These accounts were traced 2 hours ago, not to Clara, to Evelyn herself." Gasps rippled like waves. He tapped a page, his evidence already waiting. "Our security chief intercepted a transfer from one of these so-called accounts directly into a subsidiary Evelyn controls. And here is the audit trail." The room erupted in shock, voices overlapping, chairs scraping. Evelyn's mask cracked, fury flashing across her face. Lies she spat, but no one moved to defend her. Clara watched the fortress she had built crumble stone by stone as Damian laid out each receipt, each timestamp, until there was nothing left but silence. Finally, the chairman cleared his throat. "The vote is unnecessary. Mr. Cross retains control. Evelyn, you are dismissed." Evelyn rose, her glare like ice burning into Clara's skin. "This isn't over," she hissed before sweeping from the room. The doors slammed shut behind her, and Clara realized she had been holding her breath the entire time. Damian's hand found hers under the table, his grip tight, unshakable. "It's over," he whispered, but Clara knew better. It was only the beginning. Later, as the city lights glittered beyond the penthouse windows, Damian poured 2 glasses of wine, setting one gently in front of her. "You saved me, Clara," he said, his voice stripped of armor. "No," she replied softly. "You saved yourself. I was just the excuse you needed to fight back." He studied her for a long moment, then reached into his pocket, producing a small box. Clara's chest tightened as he opened it, revealing not the glittering ring Tiffany's had sold them for show, but something simpler, smaller, a band of platinum with a single stone, elegant and real. "This time there are no cameras," Damian said, his eyes locking onto hers. "No contracts, no lies. I don't want a performance. I want you. All of you." The silence stretched heavy, filled only by the sound of her own heartbeat. Clara thought of the night in the ballroom, of the storm in the Hamptons, of the boardroom that nearly crushed them both. She thought of the man who had dragged her into a lie, and in the same breath offered her the fiercest truth she had ever known. Her voice trembled, but her gaze held steady. "Then stop calling me your pretend lover, Damian. Call me what I really am. His breath caught as he slid the ring onto her finger. "My forever," ere he whispered. In that moment, the city, the scandals, the battles ahead all faded. There was only Clara and Damian standing at the edge of a life neither had expected, but both were willing to fight for. The girl who once poured champagne at galas now wore a ring chosen in honesty, and the billionaire who once thought love was weakness now held it like the greatest power he had ever claimed. Outside, the skyline blazed with light, the city buzzing with stories it would spin tomorrow, but inside the penthouse a different story had already begun. One born of lies tested by storms and sealed with the terrifying, undeniable truth of forever.